And so today we're actually carrying on at a brief series heading up to Thanksgiving called Walking Worthy. What does it mean to walk worthy before God? And so how are we to walk worthy if we're considering ourselves to be followers of Jesus, particularly? And so today we're exploring this thought about walking in forgiveness. I heard about a man who really loved dogs. They were so close to his heart that he devoted his life to these animals. And he read about them and he studied them. And he even gave lectures to other dog lovers about how to take care of your dog. And so one day he decided to pour a new concrete patio in his backyard. And his neighbor watched from a distance to see him do his work. And then the neighbor watched as he smoothed out that last square foot of the concrete. And just then, a large dog appeared and he walked right through the fresh cement, leaving paw prints behind. Well, this man muttered something probably not nice under his breath, and he smoothed out the damage that was there. So then this person went inside to get some rope or some string so that he could build a little bit of a fence to keep people and to keep the animals out. But when he got back outside, he discovered more dog tracks through his freshly poured cement. And so again, he smoothed out the cement, he put up this little fence, and he figured, great, and got it. And so when he went inside to grab a coffee, and 5 minutes later he looked out and he saw more paw prints in the cement. And he was really mad now. And so he got out his trowel and he smoothed out the last bits of that which had been upset. And he got back to his porch, and just then he turned around and he saw this dog sit down right in the middle of his freshly poured cement. Well, he was so mad, he went inside, he grabbed his gun, he went and shot the dog dead. Well, the neighbor saw this and was astounded, and he came running over and he said, I thought you loved dogs. as human beings are pretty good because we've got this tracker. Oh, you hurt me. Oh, you sinned against me. Oh, you looked at me crooked. Oh, whatever it is. And sure enough, when something comes up that we don't like, guess what comes back is all this flood of, I remember when, right? Your forgiveness needs to be unlimited, is what Jesus is saying. Now, this was a unique concept really for Jews. If you go back into the Old Testament, the rabbis, the Jewish rabbis, even at the point when Jesus was walking the earth, and at this point where this word is being shared, the rabbis had something in the back of their mind that comes from the book of Amos, chapter 3, verse 1. In Amos chapter 3, or 1 verse 3, sorry, it says, "The people of Damascus have sinned again and again, and I will not let them go unpunished." This is God speaking. As meaning that God will only forgive 3 times, therefore they are only to forgive 3 times. So along now comes Peter, and he knows that. He's aware of what that Old Testament verse was. But unfortunately, the rabbis took it way out of context, and they were practicing this model of forgiving 3 times, and then you're done. I don't have to forgive you after that. So Peter thinks, I'm going to supersede that. So almost, he's going twice and beyond, right? So 7 times, right? That's pretty generous, isn't it, God? And Jesus said, no. No, Peter. Your forgiveness is to be unlimited. At a convention held in Vancouver a little while ago, with their wives, 2 businessmen got together. They had gone to UBC together for a number of years and graduated, and now have spent the last 15 years in their work field. And they're coming together for this conference or this convention. And so they sat in the lobby all night talking about what had gone on and transpired in their life through the years. And they knew that their wives probably weren't going to be all that happy with them. And so the next morning, as the convention was carrying on, the 2 guys caught up to each other, and one said, "What did your wife think about us staying up all night?" And he said, "Oh, my wife got historical." And he said, "You mean hysterical?" "No, I mean historical. She told me everything that I had done wrong, all of our marriage, and it was this event that brought it all on." We can hold on to the sins and behaviors of others that are committed against us. And we can hold grudges, but we must forgive if we are to be worthy of our walk and worthy of our calling to be Christ followers. We are to be reflectors of God's love and grace and forgiveness to those in the body of Christ and to those outside of the walls of this church within our community, to showcase the heart and the mercy of God. You see, our forgiveness must be unlimited, just as Jesus was teaching. Next, we notice in this text that if we're to walk in forgiveness, not only must our forgiveness be unlimited, but our forgiveness must also be unearned. What we give to others, they cannot earn it. So in verses 26 and 27, we see this played out. And so the man fell down, the Bible tells us, before his master, and he begged him, please be patient with me. I'll pay it all. I don't want my wife and my kids and myself sold off into slavery. And then the Bible says that the master was filled with compassion and pity for him, and he released him from his debt. So let's recap. Okay, here we have a guy who owed $1 gazillion to Revenue Canada. And the Prime Minister called in the debt. he realizes in reality there was no way on the face of God's green earth that this guy could ever make enough money in the working years that were yet ahead of him to ever pay back. So Jesus goes on to say that the prime minister actually had pity and compassion for the man, and he forgave him all his debt. He wiped it off. The slate is clean. This man had not earned anything. He didn't earn his forgiveness. There was nothing he could do. There was no price he could pay. He was at the mercy of the king. During World War II, there was a family in the United States, and the parents were sending off their 18-year-old to go and fight in the South Pacific. And as they sent him away from the train station, as they moved away from the train station and said their goodbyes, the mom obviously had tears running down her face. Will I ever see my boy again? And Dad had bitterness locked in his heart. He was mad that there was a war and that his son was being conscripted to go into this war. And he said, and he muttered to himself, if that boy dies, I hope every Jap in the world is killed. Wow. The boy was killed in the war, and no one will ever know the heartache of what that family had to endure. But the father, as a follower of Jesus, went through a long process as he tried to cope and deal with the loss of his son. And so he would often go into the forest nearby his home day in and day out, and he wept and he prayed. He kept telling himself and God, I refuse to be destroyed by my bitterness. I refuse to be destroyed by my bitterness, because it was eating him, and he knew it, but he didn't know how to release it. And so when the government insurance was paid on their son's death, the father took the money and he gave it to the Global Advance Fund, which, if you look on the envelopes that are at the end of the pew, that's missions. And he gave it to the work of missions, and he earmarked it for mission work with missionaries who were working in Japan. You see, only God can bring about that kind of transformation in a person's heart. The Japanese hadn't earned this father's forgiveness. He, the father, simply gave it because of his relationship with God through his son, Jesus Christ. And so as Christians, we are going to experience times when we can't see how to forgive someone for the wrong that they have done to us. People have hurt us, right? People have betrayed us, right? People have disappointed us. People have let us down. People have screwed us over. And they haven't done anything to deserve forgiveness, and yet God says, give it. Give it. And so that's when we then, like the king in our story, have to show compassion for another person and forgive them, even if they have done nothing, and even if they're not asking to earn that forgiveness. If we are to walk in forgiveness, not only must our forgiveness be unlimited, not only must it be unearned, but thirdly, it also must be unconditional. We see that here in the story of Matthew, and so I'm going to ask you once again to stand. Okay, this is an exercise time for you. And we're going to continue the story. So Matthew 18:28. But when the man left the king, he's now just been forgiven his gazillion dollars. Prime Minister says, you're okay, I love you, you can stay in Canada. But when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. And he grabbed this guy by the throat and he demanded instant payment. And his fellow servant fell down before him and he begged for a little more time. Please be patient and I will pay you, he pleaded. But his creditor would not wait.
he had the man arrested and jailed until the debt could be paid in full. And when some of the other servants saw this, they were very upset. And they went to the prime minister, the king, and he told him what had happened. And then the king called in the man that he had forgiven and said, "You evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy for your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you?" And then the angry king sent the man to prison until he had paid every penny. That's what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart. You may be seated. This is the word of the Lord. The first servant had not only been forgiven of something that he had not earned, but he was also forgiven unconditionally. There was zero. There was nada, there was none, there was no conditions to his being forgiven. He received forgiveness, no strings attached. Many times, though, like this guy in the story, we place conditions on our forgiveness. I'll forgive you if you do this. I'll forgive you if you do that. I'll forgive you if you, we did this with our kids. We'll forgive you if you promise to never do that again. Or we might go, you know what, I'm just giving up on you and I'm going to walk away because I really don't care about our relationship anymore. The servant who had been forgiven by the king had quickly forgotten, almost instantaneously forgotten what he had been forgiven of, and now he found himself in serious trouble. It's kind of like the story, a little different, but it's kind of like the story of Jesus who healed 10 lepers and only one returned and said, "Thank you. I'm so grateful." 9 just walked away and never thinking about it again. And sometimes that's what we do with our forgiveness. We just walk away and we don't really think about it or endure that or hold that to us because somehow we think we're some magnificent person who's been forgiven this great debt. So he goes out and he finds someone who owed him a little bit of money, this guy, and he instantly grabs him by the throat and he says, "I want my money now. Now." And the second guy did the very same thing that the first guy did, right? He begged and he pleaded and he fell down and he begged for more time. Just give me one more shot. Instead of getting forgiveness from this dude, he gets thrown into prison. Now, most often, we don't, when people upset us or hurt us or disappoint us or betray us or whatever, we don't throw them into prison, but we throw them into the prison, which is more psychological than physical, and we create these boundaries and the bars are up so that that person supposedly can't hurt us again. And it seemed that unlike the king, the servant had some conditions to his forgiveness. Friends, if you and I are to be worthy of our calling as followers of Jesus, we have to be more like the king. That's who we have to be like, and less like the first servant, because we cannot have conditions on our forgiveness. And the last verse, very, very profound, says that if we are to forgive our brothers and sisters, we are to do it from our heart. No conditions. And you see, that's just how God forgave us, from his heart to our heart. And we're to give from forgiveness from our heart to the hearts of others. It's unlimited. It's unearned. And there's no conditions. You see, when we walk worthy as followers of Jesus, we are identified as forgivers. That's just who we are. That's who we are. That's our identity as followers of Jesus. It's just what we do. Is it easy? Of course not. If it was easy, anyways, we wouldn't struggle. But we do struggle because to become more like Christ, we have to press through the flesh. We have to press through our own self-interests and our own desires so that we, like Jesus, who humbled himself and became obedient even to the point of death. So just as Jesus emptied himself, so too must we empty ourselves. And if you want, if anybody can identify with you in the struggle to forgive, it's Jesus. I don't know if you can remember, but Jesus, the day before he dies, the night before he dies, says to his Father, if it's possible, please take this cup from me. But in other words, what he's saying is, inside of me, Jesus, the man, I don't really want to do this because death hurts, right? Well, death itself doesn't hurt. It's the process of death that hurts. And what Jesus did is he fought through that, because Jesus then said, nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. He willingly submitted to the call of his Father. And so too must we submit to the call of our Father to forgive others from the heart. There's lots of things that forgiveness means. We won't get into that today. But one of the things that forgiveness means is that when I release that person from my heart, I choose to no longer bring that up again. It's dead. It's under the cross. Will I remember it? Of course. Will you forget the infractions that people have committed against you? Probably. Forever for some, because for some it's fairly traumatic, some of the things that you have experienced in your life. But it isn't about forgetting, it's about forgiving. And when we forgive, we end up walking like Christ. And we end up realizing we've got a lilt, as it were, in our step, because we're free. Because forgiveness doesn't free that person from their debt. Forgiveness frees me from the bondage that I have held you in. I'm the one who's let out of prison when I choose to forgive you of your sins committed against me. And that's what Jesus wants for you, is to be free. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And so forgiveness is one of the pathways towards achieving freedom. And so I trust that you will be able to walk in that today. One of the things we do, some of you may be visiting or guests with us today, is that we spend a few moments